Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to another episode of Whiskey Uncorked, where today we are going to be entering the home stretch of our 18-year-old single malt Scotch exploration series by taking a look at a bit of a unicorn bottle in the Longrow 18-year-old. Yes, we are looking at a bottle of whiskey today that, frankly, is a bit of a unicorn for everybody. But even in the US, I don't think I've ever seen a bottle for this actually on sale on the shelf here in the US. Maybe a couple times online where I just missed out on a bottle or they sold out or whatever. But to no one's surprise, here in the US, it's coming at a pretty steep premium. And yeah, this is pretty tough. But I was able to pick this one up from Scotch Whiskey Auctions back in 2022, November 2022, I believe, for a pretty solid price. Actually, it was 110 pounds was the hammer price, which is currently Springbank's RRP, their recommended retail price. So just ended up paying the hammer price and then obviously the shipping, where you have to spread that around to a couple different bottles. But ended up getting this for probably less than $200 here. So that's probably the only reason I have it, because I don't think I would have been willing to pay the $300 price point for a Longrow 18 when I could use that to buy a Springbank 18. And just because, I'm a Springbank fanboy no matter what they do, and I've loved the Longrow Red series. But at some point maybe I would have, but I've been kind of pretty leery of even spending the $300 on a Springbank 18 lately. It's just starting to feel more and more unnecessary, I guess. But I'm happy that I did manage to get one for at least a relatively solid price, a bit removed from that 110 pound recommended retail price, which translates to something like $135. But I decided that I was going to open this thing up for this review series and just give another data point. It was time for me to open it up anyways. No point in being overly precious with it. So opened it up, and it's been an interesting ride so far. Similar to the Springbank 18 review, I don't know if I'm going to have as much to say about this before or after the actual review. A few points here and there, but at the end of the day, this is a bottle where if you're able to find one of these at a price you're willing to pay, you have to consider yourself pretty lucky, and that's even if you have that opportunity. So I think I'm just going to jump right into talking about this bottle and get you a review, and then we'll talk about the score and try to assess value. Since all Springbank products are basically batch releases, every edition is going to be a little bit different. So you may have something completely different than this if you were able to find one, or if you see one in the future. But just so you know exactly what I'm drinking today, the bottling code on this one is July 7th, 2022, so 070722, and according to Whiskey Base, this is 100% ex-sherry casks, and judging by the color, that's not all that surprising. It's a pretty dark whiskey, it's pretty clearly sherried, comes on that 46% ABV, and of course is non-chill filtered and natural color. So a quick disclaimer just before I get into the tasting notes: this bottle's been a bit of a ride, even in the 1/4 or so that I've gotten through. However, I do find that with Springbank products, maybe more than any other distillery, they benefit from just sitting there in the bottle, getting some air in the bottle, letting them sit there for a few months, and then coming back to them. So I don't know if I've gotten the complete experience, but I can tell you that the first couple pours out of here were pretty intense. It was a much different experience than I'm having now, both on the nose and the palate. Not that it was bad, but it was surprising. So I'll talk a little bit about the differences in that, but I do also assume that my experience with this will continue to change. So even after this review, I'm going to stick this bottle in the back of the cabinet, try to forget about it, and maybe come back to it the beginning of the fall or something like that. Give it the summer in the back of the cabinet just to kind of mellow out a little bit more. So just keep that in mind. We'll see what happens. But with that, why don't we get into the nosing and tasting notes and give it a score. So as I mentioned, when I first opened this thing up, it was intense. It was one of the most industrial, dirty, creosote, asphalty whiskeys I think that I would have on my shelf. I do have a handful, or maybe less than a handful of others that I would consider to be in the similar category to that. But this thing was intense, and I was a little bit worried because I was getting it both on the nose and the palate, and it was definitely throwing me for a little bit of a loop. However, I can say, as I mentioned, this has changed quite a bit even in the few weeks that I've had this thing open, and it has calmed down tremendously and become significantly more balanced, and both on the nose and the palate, although maybe not quite to the same degree split between those two. So I can say that this is no longer the tire fire that it was when I first opened it, but let's see what I'm getting on it today. So it is still peaty, and you certainly do still get that fairly classic industrial Longrow smokiness. Again, I mentioned kind of tire fire, hot asphalt, hot motor oil, creosote. Creosote being, at least for me, the real dry, crusty char that's left over like on a grill grate after you spend all day grilling burgers and steaks or whatnot. But it's much quieter than it used to be, and it's much more integrated with everything else. In addition to the peat, the other big note that I'm getting is a jammy quality. It's a raspberry jam, dark fruit, red fruit jam, something like that. And it's bringing a really nice sweetness that is balancing that real dirty quality, which I think probably most people want when they're looking for a heavily peated, kind of heavily wine-influenced whiskey. They want those two competing things that tend to really complement each other. So the other thing that I would say that I'm getting here, there is something that's kind of bright. And I was trying to think of what it was, and through the process of going through kind of the sherry notes, the standard sherry notes that I was looking for, I kind of came to the conclusion that we're kind of talking like a lemon shortbread. There's like this, it's like a ray of sunshine in the darkness sort of thing, but it definitely made me think of the Girl Scouts. I think they're called Lemon Ups. They're just little circle shortbread lemon cookies. And the way it kind of came to that is I was looking for fig Newtons, which is a common sherry note, at least for myself. And I couldn't find any figs, but I was definitely kind of getting the cookie part. And I knew there was something kind of acidic in there. It wasn't really coming off as like fresh lemon juice or anything, but I settled on that lemon shortbread note, and I think I'm pretty confident with that one. So there's some other things happening. There's a lot of things happening in here. There's some toasted pecans or some toasty nuttiness from that sherry. There's also like some caramel in there. But I think this is something you can kind of pick at for a while. You got your big peat notes, your big kind of raspberry jam notes, and then there's a whole bunch of other like more subtle layers beneath that. So overall, I've really begun to like this nose. It smells fantastic, and I just catch myself sitting there just enjoying it on the nose, and it's always fun when I find a whiskey that I almost just forget to even drink it. So the nose has come a long way since opening it. It is much more balanced. There is depth and complexity there, and I am really, really digging it. In terms of like heavily peated noses, this is probably one of my favorites that I've had more recently, at least. And it's definitely up there as just being one of my all-around favorite noses that's of bottles that are on my shelf, and I anticipate that may continue to improve. So the big question is, was the palate able to open up and be as enjoyable as the nose? Because if it is, then we're talking about a special whiskey here. Let's get into it. Cheers. This is another one of those mouth-watering whiskeys where I kind of have a hard time starting to talk after I take a sip because that's just, I think I have to like keep swallowing. So I apologize for that, but it's a good thing. It is a positive for sure. The one thing that I kind of learned with this whiskey so far is do not over-chew it. I've over-chewed it and felt like I've really kind of diluting this hasn't been the best idea. I haven't tried adding water to it, partly because of that. I figured that out pretty quickly, that for whatever reason, this one doesn't like to be diluted, which is pretty unusual because generally I find that Springbank whiskeys take water. You can just like pour a glass of water in it and you can still taste the whiskey. But I would definitely recommend taking it easy on the chew portion of it, or adding water to it. But this is a pretty excellent translation from the nose to the palate, with maybe the one exception is being that the peat quality is still louder on the palate than on the nose. Now, it's not super dirty and ashy and motor oily, at least not as much as it was to begin with, but that's still definitely a big part of the overall experience. However, that raspberry jam is definitely there. It's kind of like a raspberry jam drizzled with hot motor oil sort of thing. So you still have your big dirty peat, you have your sticky jam, and that kind of acidic lemon shortbread note is still in here, but probably it's not able to kind of hold up quite as well. But with that, let's take one more sip. Cheers. So there's another note in here that took me a little while to figure out, and I think I got it. If you go to steakhouses, they give you the big basket full of different rolls of bread, and then in there, and at least when I'm with people, no one ever goes for this one, and that's good for me because I always take it because it's delicious. But it's the real dark one. Everyone thinks it's like this wheat bread, but it's actually pretty sweet. And I was looking online, like, what is this actually called? And it looks like it's just like steakhouse black bread or steakhouse dark bread. But I found a recipe that referred to it as a sweet molasses bread. And that's really what we're talking about. There's molasses and honey and cocoa powder in that recipe, at least for the one I was looking at. And that's exactly what is in here. Right? It's bready. It's kind of like got a rye quality and oaty quality to it. But there's this sweetness that's... I don't know if I could have explained to you what mixing molasses and honey would have been like, but because you got something that's really dark and heavy and something that's generally pretty sweet and light. But you can kind of get both of those flavors in there alongside this kind of very dark cocoa baking powder, or baking chocolate powder, something like that. Probably pretty spot on, and it kind of carries into the finish. All right, one more sip to dig into the finish a little bit more, and we'll get you a score. So that rye bread, that slightly herbal quality, definitely follows up into the finish. There's a little bit of black pepper in there as well, maybe just ever so slight touch of licorice. Although that's, if you hate black licorice in your whiskey, I don't think this will be a turnoff to you. I think it's there, but you really have to look for it. And then a very nice oakiness. It's subtle. It's kind of buried under some of the other more sticky qualities. But so you're getting, those are kind of the new things that come out, and then you're still getting that kind of dark cocoa and that kind of sticky raspberry jam quality. So if you are a fan of Longrow, particularly Longrow with some good sherry influence, or if you're a fan of Longrow Reds, this is going to be right up your alley. This is fantastic. I think the whole debate for me was, do I like this as much as I like my bottle Springbank 18? So with the Springbank being a little bit more my style, I do still think I probably like that one better overall. However, I do feel like this one's probably going to have more fans. And as I mentioned, I expect to continue to like this more and more as I drink it, as my overall experience with Springbanks, again, has been the more time you get it to just let it chill out and open up, the better and better it tends to get. So I guess the big question is, am I at a 9 out of 10 with this one? On the nose, I think I am. I think I'm there on the nose. I really, really love the nose. And the palate has been getting better and better too. I think that this is similar to that Bruichladdich 18. I think this is going to end up a 9 out of 10 by the time this is all said and done. Maybe even first pour in September, whenever I come back to this, is almost certainly I'm going to think it's a 9 out of 10 because it is extremely good. I love the combination of dirty peat and that real jammy raspberry and all the other subtleties that you are still able to pick up, even though you're dealing with some pretty big, strong flavors to begin with. But for the time being, I'm going to stick to my guns here, as I've mentioned, trying to be slightly more conservative with my scores, being that I'm honest. So if I'm ever on that edge, I'm tending to maybe lean slightly lower. So I'm going to stick with an 8 out of 10 for now, but I'm almost guaranteeing you, I will think this is a 9 by the end of the year. So talking about value with these, again, really difficult. If you can get this for the recommended retail price, or if you can get, you're stealing basically. If you're lucky to get one of these either in the distillery, or you've got a great relationship with the shop and you're in the UK where they're able to charge you 110 pounds, yeah, make sure you have one of these on your shelf. It's fantastic. At $300, I can't, like, that's up to you. You know whether you're willing to pay that for this or not. If you don't know, then don't do it. Try to figure out how much you love Longrow. Try to figure out if you can have a sample from someone, if there's a bar by you that might have it. But again, if you're in the US, you don't see these very often, so that makes it pretty tough. But yeah, in terms of the overall 18-year-old exploration series, similar to the Springbank 18, this is an outlier for a number of different reasons. It's kind of hard to wrap it in with the broader conversation just because it is a bit of a unicorn. The prices are all over the place, values all over the place. There's different batches, all that stuff. And this is really a bit of an indulgence, but also just an example of what Scotch whiskey can be. And that, I think, is important. And we'll talk about that a little bit more in the final kind of wrap-up retrospective video. But you probably have an opinion on this, one way or the other, good, bad. I'm not paying for that. I buy it every time. They're going to be all over the place. Let me know what category you fall in the comment section. And let me know if you've had this one. I was surprised to find a couple other people that knew exactly the version I was talking about with the Springbank 18, but you guys had opinions. I'd love to hear your opinions on this one if you've been able to try it. I tend to think this one's going to have some pretty solid reviews. But until next time, join me again here as we get pretty close to the end of this whole 18-year-old series. I think we just have 2 more bottles, the Lechik 18, and I think I'm going to end on the Port Charlotte 18. But with that, please leave a comment, like, subscribe, the whole spiel. Really looking forward to getting into the rest of this series and wrapping it up. Well, a little bit sad because I've been drinking some pretty damn good whiskey over the last couple months. Not that there isn't more. But yeah, this has been a lot of fun, and I'm looking forward to wrapping it up and get my thoughts in order for that podcast episode, the retrospective. Should be a lot of fun. But until then, thank you so much again for being here and taking your time out to watch the whole video. I greatly, greatly appreciate it. Cheers.